Welcome, Kathy.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm with the North and Central San Mateo County chapter. There's also a South San Mateo County chapter for the League of Women Voters. Before we get started on the propositions, I've got some information that I like to give people that is helpful in voting. And in just some general ideas about how to look at propositions and how to evaluate them. So we'll start with that, and I'm going to do a share screen, and you have to bear with me on the share screen because it takes me a few seconds to make it happen. Okay, now you should. There it goes. Okay, so you should be seeing my slides now. And we'll go to the first slide, and we're going to talk about voting. So probably some of you, since you're watching this presentation today, you haven't voted yet, you're still evaluating. There are many ways to vote. You can do it, all of you should have gotten your ballot by now, and you can mail it back with the postage paid envelope. Or you can use a county drop box, or you can vote in person. Okay, and all of the information about voting is at San Mateo, California. I don't remember what the rest of the acronym is actually. smcacre.org/elections. So you can get lots of information there. But most importantly, don't forget to sign your ballot. Since we're doing this at the Belmont Virtual Library, okay, I thought I'd mention where the Belmont voting centers and drop boxes are, and also San Mateo locations. The voting center is open now through Election Day, and that's at the Registration and Elections Building at 40 Tower Road. Voting centers, where you can vote in person, will be open 10/31 through Election Day, 11/3. In Belmont, it's Notre Dame University at the Taub Center on 1500 Ralston. In San Mateo, it's Beresford Rec Center, the Congregational Church of San Mateo, the San Mateo County Events Center on Delaware, and then the main public library on 3rd Avenue. And drop boxes, there is a drop box at the Belmont Library and at Belmont and San Mateo City Halls, as well as the Registration and Elections Building, the Rec Center at 725 Mount Diablo Avenue, and the Marina Library on Susan Court. You can register to vote still by 10/19, basically 15 days before the election, I think. Go to registertovote.ca.org. And there's a nifty tool now to track your ballot. Where's my ballot.sos.ca.gov. I highly recommend doing this. I left my ballot at a drop box, and used this tool and got notification that my ballot had gotten counted. So that was a big relief. So I urge everyone to check that out. And please vote early, and then you're done. Okay, more information than what I'm giving you here today. You should have gotten most of this. Okay, the voter's guide you get in the mail. You can also get easy voter guides, and a great place to get those at are the public libraries. And you can get this online as well. And then Voter's Edge is a service created by League of Women Voters, which gives you a lot of information about the candidates and about local measures that will be on your ballot. So those are all sources of more information. Something about the League of Women Voters and how we approach this kind of proposition pro-con presentation. The League of Women Voters does not support or oppose candidates or political parties. It does encourage informed and active participation in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues and we do try to influence public policy through education and advocacy. So what are state ballot measures or propositions? They're proposed laws presented to the public. It can make brand new laws, it can change, a proposition can change existing laws, or it can change the California Constitution. It's placed on the ballot via a collection of enough voter signatures, okay, or by state lawmakers. And then finally, it requires a majority vote to pass. In other words, greater than 50% of the voters must say yes. Quickly go through some ideas on how to evaluate ballot propositions. Okay, we examine the measure, what the measure seeks to accomplish. Do you agree with the goals? Is the measure consistent with your ideas about government? Who are the real sponsors and opponents of the measure? Check where the money is coming from on votersedge.org. That's a good place to look at that topic. Is the measure written well? Will it create conflicts in the law that may require court resolution or interpretation? Is it good government? Does the measure create its own revenue source? Does it earmark, restrict, or obligate government revenues? Does the measure mandate a government program or service without addressing how it will be funded? Does the measure deal with one measure that can be easily decided by a yes or no vote? Or is it a complex issue that should be thoroughly examined in the legislative arena? And finally, if the measure amends the Constitution, consider whether it really belongs in the Constitution. Would a statute accomplish the same purpose? Be wary of distortion tactics and commercials that rely on image but tell nothing of substance about the measure, and beware of half-truths. So today we'll be talking about, well, we have a limited amount of time, but we should be able to get through these propositions, and if you see, that's 10 of them. So we're not likely to get through all 12. I also have a presentation on Measure RR. And if you, what I'd suggest, if I will leave it up to Nicole towards when we have about 10 minutes left to decide whether we want to continue with propositions or whether we want to skip to Measure RR. So I will leave it to Nicole to manage the content for the end of this presentation. And this is basically the order that we'll be doing these in. Okay.
Happy to. Kathy, thank
you. During this presentation, I will not be making any recommendations for or against propositions. The League of Women Voters does give a list of recommendations for the propositions. If you're interested to see what they say, then you go to this website. And also, just FYI, before the end of the presentation, let's see if I've got it. Actually, if you do a Google search, you'll find a lot of compilations of various sources, recommendations on ballot propositions. Sometimes they're interesting to look at. The remaining public pro-con sessions given by the League of Women Voters, there's 2 remaining. Tuesday, October 20th at 7 p.m. and Monday, October 26th at 7 p.m. And you can register for those at the League of Women Voters South San Mateo County.org. And then finally, just a little, publicity for League of Women Voters. If you're interested in doing this kind of work, giving pro-con presentations, we also do candidate forums, we do registration drives. I urge you to look up our websites and think about joining us, please. Okay, so I'm going to end this slideshow and start the first presentation. Okay, and let's see if I can to stop this so I can see my screen. That's better. Okay, I've got some nifty videos. So the South San Mateo County created videos of each of the proposition presentations. That's what I'm going to be showing you. They're great. It's not just the information on the slide. There's also additional information that they provide during their presentation. So we'll start with Proposition 14. We're going to start with Proposition 15, which it changes property tax. So this is the wrong one. I want to go to 15. Bear with me. We're not going to do that yet. Now I have to share the screen. And let's see right here. Okay, here we go, guys. Get rid of this.
Jennifer Bester. My colleagues and I are presenting on behalf of the Leagues of Women Voters for San Mateo County. I will be presenting the pros and cons for State Ballot Measure 15. Proposition 15 is a constitutional amendment put on the ballot by voter initiative. Proposition 15 requires commercial and industrial real property to be taxed based on current market value instead of purchase price. It is expected to increase funding for public schools and community colleges, as well as local governments in California. How did this start? In the mid-1970s, property values increased rapidly each year. Taxation of each property was based on its current market value. Each local government entity, the city, the school district, the fire district, levied its own percentage tax on this value. In that period of rapid inflation, individual property tax bills increased quickly. Owners, especially retired homeowners on fixed incomes, were looking for a way to protect themselves against escalating, unaffordable property taxes. Proposition 13 was passed in 1978. It limited the taxation value of properties to their acquisition value plus an annual inflation factor, no greater than 2% a year. Since property values have increased faster than 2% a year for most of the past 40 years, long-term property holders pay significantly less than recent buyers for equivalent properties. Property tax is also levied on business equipment and fixtures. Statewide, about $65 billion is collected in property tax. Of that, about 1/5 is collected on 600,000 commercial and industrial properties. Statewide, 60% of all property tax paid goes to cities, special districts, county governments, and redevelopment debt. Educational entities receive about 40%. Here in San Mateo County, less is allocated to local governments and more to educational entities. Currently, about $800 million is spent statewide administering property tax assessment and collection. Let me first point out that Proposition 15 does not affect residential property. It would separate commercial and industrial properties from all other properties. It would change their taxation basis and assessment regulations. Single-family residences and apartments would not be affected, nor would small commercial property owners or agricultural land. Starting in January 2022, commercial and industrial properties would be taxed on their current market value, with reassessment to market at least every 3 years for properties worth over $3 million. Reassessment of certain small business occupied properties would be delayed until 2025. All businesses in California would also get a new tax break. They would be able to exempt up to $500,000 of equipment and fixtures from the separate 1% business personal property tax. Certain small businesses could exempt more. How will the money that's generated be distributed? A new statewide educational fund would be created. Any new revenue allocated to an educational entity would go into the new statewide educational fund. Note that every county is different. Some allocate more to education, others less. In San Mateo, after all redevelopment obligations have been met, over 62% of new revenues will be allocated to the new statewide fund. Statewide, this contribution is estimated closer to 40%. Then, money coming out of the statewide educational fund would be allocated primarily based on headcount. However, schools whose local property tax exceeds the state's funding formula will receive less, though a minimum of $100 per student. Many districts in San Mateo County have recently become property tax funded districts due to property tax growth. Those that just qualify to be property tax funded will receive more than $100 per student. Right now, for example, that would include Cabrillo, Redwood City Elementary, and Jefferson High. Overall, due to high levels of property tax, San Mateo County's educational institutions will receive somewhat less than other counties. The remaining new revenue within each county would be distributed to local government entities based on their existing allocations. On average, this is 60% statewide, though it varies greatly. At full implementation in 2025, the Legislative Analyst's Office estimates $8 to $12.5 billion of new revenue, with several hundred million a year of new administrative costs. Altogether, they forecast between $6.5 and $11.5 billion of net new revenue from this measure. 60% statewide should go to local city, county, and service governments. The 40% allocation to education would represent roughly a 4 to 7% supplement to the basic funding formula for state-funded schools. $100 would represent roughly a 1.2% supplement for our property tax-funded schools. Property tax-funded schools will receive new revenue, though they may see an offsetting loss of existing business personal property tax. The Legislative Analyst's Office also emphasizes that the value of commercial property can change a lot from year to year, so this revenue could also change a lot from year to year. Not all entities would be guaranteed new money. The Legislative Analyst's Office indicates the rural areas may actually end up losing money. Supporters say that Proposition 15 provides billions in new revenue for our communities and schools. They say that 10% of the wealthiest businesses will provide more than 90% of the revenue. They say that it gives tax breaks to small businesses to help our economy grow. And they say that it keeps Proposition 13's protection for homeowners, renters, and farms. Opponents say that Proposition 15 would trigger the largest property tax increase in California's history. They say that additional costs will ultimately raise prices for consumers. They say it will make it harder for people to start small businesses. And they say it will require huge costs to administer. This is a controversial measure that changes the state constitution. We've attempted to capture both sides' arguments. We hope the numbers and information we've presented here provide some local perspective. Supplement this information with other trusted sources. Proponents listed here have raised over $36 million in support of this proposition. Opponents also listed here have raised over $21 million in opposition. Proposition 15, yes or no? A yes vote supports a different market value-based property valuation system for commercial properties. Centralized, statewide distribution of the school and community college share of new revenue. A significant change in county assessor and appeals workload. A no vote opposes the proposition's removal of Proposition 13 protections for commercial and industrial properties.
Okay, so that's our first Proposition 15. And let me go, I think that will get me back to questions. It did. So we have one question. Jarvis recommends no because he says it will cause residential property tax increase, which defeats Prop 13. Do you agree there could be an effect on Prop 13? I assume that means so this proposition does affect Prop 13, but only for commercial properties. It does not have an effect on residential property tax. I think that answers that question. Other questions on Prop 15? There was TV ads show a small business person saying that small business leases require us to pay these taxes. What is he talking about? Small business leases require us to pay these taxes. This would just be my interpretation of that statement, but basically landlords who have to pay additional property tax generally pay it back to the people who are leasing. So in other words, the leases would go up. I assume that's what that statement implies, but that's my interpretation. Let's see. Did you say the change should not affect apartment complexes? That is correct. They are considered to be residential. I believe that is correct. If someone knows for sure that that is not a correct statement, please let me know. But I believe that apartment complexes are included in residential. Working from home business considered homeowner or commercial tax for this property. If you're working from home, your home is a residential property. So it would not get additional property tax. How does this reduce the income in rural communities? Good question. I am not sure. What I would suggest, if I can't answer a question, doing an internet search on your question is usually pretty productive. Did you say the change should not affect apartment complex? I believe that is true. But again, I would have to, let me see if I've got, I have a cheat sheet with a lot of facts on it. Let me see if I've got anything on here that clarifies that. And I'm not seeing it right off the top of this reading. So what I'll do is as we watch the next proposition, I will see whether or not I can get an exact answer to that question. Okay, let's see, I am going to go here. Do an escape out. So we're going to go to Prop 19 next. Give me a minute. Yes, Prop 19. And that is the other proposition dealing with changes to property taxes. And I need to go back here and share the screen. Get used to my entire process here. Okay. This is Prop 19, the other property tax initiative.
Jennifer Bester. My colleagues and I represent the Leagues of Women Voters of San Mateo County. I will be presenting the pros and cons of State Ballot Measure 19. Proposition 19 is a constitutional amendment that was put on the ballot by the legislature. It stands in place of an initiative that had been qualified earlier by voter signatures by the California Realtors Association. The legislative version received support from most Democrats as well as some Republicans in both houses. Proposition 19 addresses the ability for qualified homeowners to transfer a low property tax valuation to a new primary residence. It also addresses the right of children to inherit a low property tax valuation on a parent's primary residence, as well as on income properties, including farms. California's existing property tax assessment system is based on a property owner's original acquisition cost plus a limited 2% increase per year of ownership. Properties held for a long period typically pay significantly lower property taxes than similar, neighboring, more recently acquired properties. Proposition 60 in 1986 and Proposition 90 in 1998 created the existing law that allows certain homeowners to take, one time, their existing lower property tax basis with them when they move to a new home. Specifically, homeowners who are 55 or older, disabled, or who have been affected by natural disasters like earthquakes or wildfires can transfer their existing low valuation to a new primary residence that is of equal or lesser market value than their old home. However, statewide, they can only do it within their existing home county or to 10 other counties that allow incoming transfers, including San Mateo, Los Angeles, Orange, Santa Clara, Alameda, and San Diego counties. Meanwhile, Proposition 58 in 1986 created existing law that allows parents to transfer their current low property tax basis to children when the parents transfer a principal residence. This also applies to other real property, both residential and commercial, with a combined current assessment value, not market value, assessment value, of less than $1 million. In 2017, the Legislative Analyst's Office estimated that about 5% of all property transfers in the state, primarily single-family homes, had received this exclusion over the past decade. Proposition 19 extends the ability to keep a lower existing property tax basis when a qualified homeowner moves. Instead of requiring the new home's value to be less than the existing home, it can be more expensive. The property tax basis increases proportionally, though only on the excess market value between the two homes. The proposition extends the ability to move to any county in the state for all qualified homeowners. And for those homeowners 55 and over or disabled, instead of just one such transfer, 3 are allowed. At the same time, Proposition 19 narrows the ability of parents to transfer a low property tax basis to children, except in the case of a primary residence. Only for a parent's primary residence can the existing property tax basis be transferred to a child. That child must make it their own primary residence within 1 year, qualifying for a homeowner's exemption. And only the first $1 million of difference between tax valuation and market value is excluded. Proposition 19 also adds family farms to the properties eligible for family transfer or inheritance with their existing property tax valuation. Finally, Proposition 19 provides for any net savings to the state as a result of these changes to flow to a statewide fire response fund. This proposition creates a number of changes in property tax revenue. Generally, these changes counterbalance financially. Over time, the Legislative Analyst's Office expects up to hundreds of millions of dollars a year of increased property tax revenue to flow to local city and county governments. Any decrease in property tax receipts as a result of greater portability for qualified homeowners will be offset by higher property tax payments, particularly those on inherited properties. The Legislative Analyst's Office also expects higher property taxes for schools and community colleges in areas such as ours, where many districts are funded by property tax rather than state aid. Finally, the Legislative Analyst's Office expects that the additional property tax generated in state aid-funded school districts will lower the state's funding requirements in some years. Any reduction will flow into a fund to improve fire protection and response by both state and local fire agencies. Supporters of Proposition 19 say that the proposition provides housing flexibility for seniors, the disabled, and disaster victims, that it creates homeownership opportunities for new homeowners statewide, that it eliminates unfair tax advantages for heirs of property owners, that it increases funding for firefighters, for schools, and for emergency response. Opponents say that the proposition is a massive tax increase, that it increases competition for smaller or starter homes, that it takes away inheritance rights of children that have been provided by Proposition 58. The California Association of Realtors provided much of the $35 million of funding in support of the proposition, including qualification of the initiative. The Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association has raised $450,000 in opposition to date. A yes vote on Proposition 19 supports a constitutional amendment that would allow eligible homeowners to transfer lower tax valuations anywhere within the state, unrestricted by home value, up to 3 times. It would require that inherited homes that are not used as principal residences, such as second homes or rentals, be reassessed at market value when transferred. Also, it would allocate any net state savings that result from the ballot measure to fire prevention agencies. A no vote would maintain existing property tax related advantages and restrictions.
Okay, so that's Prop 19. Let me see whether there's any questions. I sent out a clarification from Prop 15. I did find in my search that Prop 15 does not apply to apartment buildings, but if there's a commercial part of that property, that part would be reassessed. So that answers that part, that question. Let's see, Q&A. Okay, so I've been advised that the problem, I am aware that my audio and video are on, and I'll be careful about extraneous noises, but it needs to be on for you to be able to hear the video. So I don't have any way of modifying that. Sorry about that. Let's see. Is there any specific information on transferring to a more expensive home? Other than the tax bill would still go up, but not by much. How is the additional expense calculated with the new law? I believe, so again, for exact information on this kind of question, it's very, very specific. It's good to do an internet search. But generally, when you move the property tax evaluation from your last house to a new house, if a county allows it, you basically move that property tax evaluation. But then thereafter, you are assessed at a higher rate. Okay, basically you are reassessed every year, 2 years, something like that. Somebody raised their hand. Maybe somebody has a better answer than this for this question. Let's see. Let me see if I can. I'm not seeing a way to address raised hands, so there they are. There's one raised hand. I'm not seeing a way to address the raised, oh, there it is.
Also, Kathy, and participants, anyone raising their hand can also put their question in the chat.
That's probably
sorry, in the Q&A, so that Kathy can address that question.
Okay, so I'll go on to the next. 19, if this proposition passes, how long will it take to be executable? Let's see, when would it be? That's usually addressed in my information. This is a constitutional amendment. I think generally constitutional amendments would then be basically it'd be a 2021. I am not seeing that specific information in my text. So again, I will look at that during our next review of our next proposition. So I'll try to get that question answered. But I think constitutional amendments basically are valid in the next calendar year. So basically after January 1st. Let's see. Does 15 also allow seniors and others to take their property tax if they move? Actually, that's a good question because it relates directly to 19. Right now, 15 property tax on residential properties can be moved if the county that you're moving to allows it. And I don't remember how many counties currently allow it in California, but it's not all counties. San Mateo is one of the counties that does allow it. What 19 changes is basically seniors can move their property tax up to 3 times. So basically it allows seniors to not be penalized by being reassessed if they move to a new property. So hopefully that answers that question. And I got a answer to when it's effective. It's actually effective April 1st, 2021. April Fool's Day? April 1st. Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Not seeing any more questions. Okay, so let's move to the next one. The next 3 concerns changes to the way, basically changes to the way that people on parole, people having to deal with bail, and also the right to vote for individuals who have served their sentences in prison. So we'll go through all 3 of those, and then we'll move to the diversity. So let me set this up for you. So we'll do parole first, which is Prop 20. And I'm going to stop it so that I can set it up. So this is Prop 20. I think everybody should see this now.
My name is Carol Jensen. My colleagues and I represent the Leagues of Women Voters of San Mateo County. Today, I'll be discussing with you the pros and cons of state ballot measure Proposition 20. Proposition 20 deals with criminal justice. It would place new limits on some sentence reductions enacted a few years ago. It would allow some theft-related crimes to be charged as felonies, and it would create 2 new crimes, serial theft and organized retail theft. Both crimes could result in jail time. The way it is now is actually due to a 2011 U.S. Supreme Court ruling stating that overcrowding in California prisons resulted in cruel and unusual punishment, and therefore the ruling ordered a reduction in the prison population. AB 109, Prop 47, which voters approved in 2014, and finally Prop 57 were all passed in an effort to find a safe, effective way to reduce prison overcrowding. Currently, theft crimes can be charged as misdemeanors if the amount is less than $950. That's part of Prop 47. Right now, parole and post-release community supervision practices for released prisoners of violent crimes allow parole breakers to be returned to jail. Prop 57, passed 4 years ago, offered a chance of parole to some serving prison sentences for crimes that don't fall on the state's list of violent crimes. These inmates would be considered for release after serving the term for their primary crimes. What Prop 20 would do is this. It would change penalties for serial theft and organized crime theft with a value of more than $250. Some felony charges would apply here. It creates a list of criteria for the Board of Parole hearings to use in considering whether to grant parole to an inmate convicted of a nonviolent crime. For example, a judge must change the terms of supervision if parole is broken 3 times. Also, it would allow prosecutors to review information about the inmate and to review the board's decision. and then it would allow victims' families to participate in parole review. Prop 20 would also change release categories from Prop 57, actually expanding the list of violent crimes for which there is no early release. This would include sex trafficking of a child and felony domestic violence. And it would expand DNA testing to require samples be taken from some people convicted of theft, such as shoplifting, also check forgery, and domestic violence. And importantly, it would require 3/4 majority in both houses of the state legislature to amend this law should Prop 20 pass. Precise costs are difficult to estimate. Depending on which aspects of Prop 20 are implemented, costs could amount to less than 1% of the state's annual budget. But because it would result in an increase in the prison population and change the way that post-release supervision is handled, Prop 20 would increase state and local costs by tens of millions of dollars annually. As for arguments for and against Prop 20, here's what supporters say. It would prevent the early release of violent offenders and sexual predators by making 28 additional crimes violent according to the Penal Code, bringing the total to 51 crimes listed as violent in the Penal Code. It also would require the victims be notified when their assailants are set free. Those in favor add that Prop 20 would not add to the prison population. It would simply prevent certain inmates convicted of violent crimes from being released early. Opponents say this proposition, if passed, would roll back prison reforms and it would cost taxpayers millions of dollars annually. It would also slash prison mental health and rehab programs, and it would result in extreme sentences for petty theft, impacting vulnerable minorities. Opponents call Prop 20 a prison spending scam at a time when we're actively closing prisons and reallocating funds toward what's needed in communities. Also, opponents say the system is already profoundly biased against minorities, and this would return California to the era of mass incarceration. Financial support looks like this. At least $4 million has been spent on the Yes on 20 campaign. The California Correctional Peace Officers Association has contributed about half of that. Opponents have spent at least $2.5 million. Californians Against Prison Spending Scam has spent $2 million, while the Committee for California Issues has spent about $300,000 to defeat Prop 20. And finally, Prop 20, yes or no? A yes vote supports this initiative to add crimes to the list of violent felonies for which early parole is restricted. It recategorizes certain types of theft and fraud crimes, and it would require DNA collection for certain misdemeanors. A no vote opposes this initiative, expanding the number of felonies considered violent for which early parole is restricted. Certain theft and fraud crimes would be categorized differently. Also, Prop 20 would require DNA samples be taken from people convicted of certain misdemeanors. And that's a look at the pros and cons for Proposition 20.
Okay, let me reduce this and stop the share. Okay, so we have one question. Are victims currently not notified when their assailants are set free? Again, I do not know the exact answer to that question, so I will do a quick search, and I'm not seeing it in my additional information. So if anybody knows the answer, I will do a search and see whether I can find out about that for you. Okay, so this is Prop 20. Any other questions about Prop 20? If not, I will set up 25, which is about bail. I will do that this way. There was one question. Did she say a no vote collects DNA? No, a yes vote would change how basically Prop 20 requires the collection of DNA from people convicted for a variety of crimes, including some crimes that were redefined as misdemeanors by Prop 47. Okay, so I need to share screen again. And we're good. Okay, so we'll start Prop 25, which is about bail.
My name is Carol Jensen. My colleagues and I represent the Leagues of Women Voters of San Mateo County. Today, I'll be presenting the pros and cons of State Ballot Measure 25. This is actually a referendum on a law that replaced cash bail with a system based on public safety and flight risk. It's a special kind of ballot measure asking voters whether to approve or reject a law passed by the legislature. In this case, it is the fate of a 2018 law abolishing cash bail in California. Companies and the Political Action Committee representing the bail industry quickly gathered signatures for this referendum after Senate Bill 10 was signed into law. As a result, SB 10 has been on hold and is awaiting a final decision by voters. The state constitution currently mandates that people arrested and sent to county jail have the right to release before trial, except for those charged with certain felony crimes. They may be released under their own recognizance when risk has been determined to be low, and they can be released by paying bail. 2 years ago, Senate Bill 10 was passed calling for the elimination of cash bail and changing the process for release from jail before trial. The day after Governor Jerry Brown signed SB 10, this veto referendum, Prop 25, was filed to overturn that bill. Now, this referendum recites SB 10 in its entirety, and Prop 25, in the form of a citizen-initiated measure, asks voters to approve SB 10. On the one hand, you have a law set to be enacted, passed 2 years ago in the state legislature. On the other hand, you have bail bonds companies who put this referendum on the ballot, actually hoping it will be defeated in order to protect the cash bail system and its industry. So, Prop 25 would eliminate release from county jail on bail. It would eliminate the release of most misdemeanor prisoners after 12 hours in jail. Instead of cash bail, SB 10 calls for risk assessments to determine which people charged with felonies and some misdemeanors can be safely released. Those considered high risk, charged with violent crimes such as murder or arson, would be detained in jail until arraignment. State trial courts would be responsible for performing these risk assessments. Here's a look at the fiscal impact. There would be increased state and local pretrial costs in the mid-hundreds of millions of dollars annually. There would be decreased county jail costs, competing effects on state and local taxes. The total impact, however, here is unknown, but there would be a loss of taxes on bail bond fees. And on the other hand, increased spending by those who have been released and who no longer have to pay bail bonds. As for arguments in favor of Prop 25, proponents who are in favor of enacting SB 10 say bail money is unfair, dangerous, and costly. Bail favors the rich who can afford to buy their freedom while they await trial, while those without wealth must stay in jail because they simply don't have the means to pay cash bail. Under this system, supporters of Prop 25 say dangerous criminals can be back on the streets once they're out on bail. Those jailed for misdemeanors would be released right away, decreasing the county jail population. Now, opponents who actually put Prop 25 on the ballot are hoping it will be defeated, therefore eliminating SB 10. They do, however, agree with supporters, also calling Prop 25 unfair, dangerous, and costly, but for different reasons. They argue that it eliminates the right to bail, that a risk assessment program is actually a computer-based algorithm which can lead to profiling and could be biased against minorities and the poor. It would be very costly, calling for the creation of a new bureaucratic network within the state court system. Speaking of costs, here's a look at financial support. Supporters have raised at least $8.3 million. This money coming from an organization called End Predatory and Unfair Money Bail. Also, various federal and state Democratic legislators and unions have contributed. Opponents have raised at least $5.4 million in an effort to defeat Proposition 25, which again would defeat SB 10. A political action committee called Californians Against the Reckless Bail Scheme, plus bail bond companies and insurance firms, many of which own bail businesses, have all contributed to this total. So to review, a yes vote on Proposition 25 would uphold Senate Bill 10, legislation which was passed 2 years ago, but immediately contested in the form of a referendum. And again, a yes vote on this measure means cash bail would be replaced with risk assessments for detained suspects in county jail who are awaiting trial. A no vote seeks to repeal SB 10, keeping in place the cash bail system for those in county jail, hoping to be released while they wait to stand trial. And that's a look at the pros and cons for Proposition 25.
Okay, so that's Proposition 25, and I have an answer to the question from the last proposition regarding whether victims are notified of incarcerated people's release on parole. And the answer to it is when requested, the Board of Parole Hearings will notify the victim and next of kin or immediate family member of the parole consideration hearing conducted for prisoners sentenced to life terms with the possibility of parole. So basically, when a prisoner is in a parole hearing, the victims can be notified if they've requested it. Okay, so there's a couple of questions on 25 regarding the risk assessment tool. Good questions. The first is, who would create the risk assessment tool? Would there be a consistent one used across the whole state? I do not know who creates the risk assessment tools. I know that they are being used currently. I don't know who actually creates them. Whether there be a consistent one used across the whole state, I think the answer to that, again, I don't know for sure, but I can do a double check. But I know the database that is used by these tools is accessible. You know, it's one database and can be accessed by these tools to yield the analytics that judges use to make determinations. And then the second question was, what is the process to changing the risk assessment tool, assuming Prop 25 goes into effect if it turns out to be highly biased? I actually know the answer to this question. There is a state law, 36, that requires that these tools be reviewed and validated by January 2021 and regularly thereafter. And they must be evaluated within 3 years. So every 3 years at a max, okay? Hopefully they're evaluated more often than that, but there's actually a state law, SB 36, that requires this. Any other questions for 25? Okay, and if something occurs to you, you can always ask it, even if we're on the next topic. So we're going to go to Proposition 17, which is the right to vote by Oh, let's stop for a second while I get this set up. Share screen thing. Okay. All right, so this is Proposition 17, restoring the right to vote on completion of a prison term.
Is Debbie Mayo. My colleagues and I represent the Leagues of Women Voters of San Mateo County. I will be presenting the pros and cons for Proposition 17. A legislative constitutional amendment is an amendment that changes our state constitution and appears as a state ballot measure because the state legislature voted to put it before the voters. The way it is now. In 1974, Proposition 10 was approved, which amended the California Constitution to disqualify persons from voting until their state imprisonment and state parole are completed. California is only one of 3 states that requires persons to complete both their prison and parole terms. 19 states allow persons on parole to vote. What Proposition 17 would do, it would amend the California Constitution to allow persons who have completed their state prison term and are on parole to vote. This would potentially affect approximately 49,000 parolees. Persons in state and federal prisons will continue to be restricted from voting. The fiscal impact of Proposition 17. There'll be increased county costs, like in the hundreds of thousands of dollars statewide for voter registration and ballot materials. And there will be increased one-time state costs, likely in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, to update voter registration cards and systems. Arguments in favor of Proposition 17. People who have completed their prison terms pay taxes at the local, state, and federal levels. They should have a voice in government. Restoring the right to vote while under parole is a way to encourage people to re-enter society and have a stake in their community. Civic engagement is connected to lower rates of recidivism. Arguments against Proposition 17. In California, parole is a legal part of the prison term, and people must successfully complete parole, which is usually 3 years, in order to have completed their sentence, at which time their voting rights would be restored. About half of parolees commit additional felonies. Recently, prison reform measures have moved nonviolent felons into county jails. While in the county jails, they have the right to vote while serving their sentence. Financial support for Proposition 17. Supporters have contributed $0.4 million, and that comes from Free the Vote California, yes on Prop 17. And there is no financial support from opponents. Proposition 17, yes or no. A yes vote supports a change to the state constitution that would allow felons who have completed their prison term and are on parole to vote. A no vote would retain the current wording of the Constitution prohibiting felons who are on parole from voting.
Okay, so that's Prop 17. I'm not seeing any questions yet. There was one question from the last proposition on Prop 25. Question is, does a vote one way or the other on Prop 25 affect SB 36? And the answer to that is no. These assessment tools are actually in use today. So SB 36 actually applies to the assessment tools that are being used by court systems today, and is independent of this particular proposition. And then there's another question about whether we recorded the program today so it can be watched later, and the answer is yes. And Nicole, at the end of this end of my presentation, we'll give you some information about that. Okay, so any questions about Prop 17? If not, we'll be moving on to Prop 16 about diversity. Okay, so I'm going to move on to Prop 16. You know my process here, so I need to share my screen again. This is Prop 16, allowing diversity as a factor in public employment, education, and contracting decisions.
Hello, my name is Debbie Mayo. My colleagues and I represent the Leagues of Women Voters of San Mateo County. I will be presenting the pros and cons on Proposition 16. Proposition 16 allows diversity as a factor in public employment, education, and contracting decisions. It is a legislative constitutional amendment. A legislative constitutional amendment is an amendment that changes our state constitution and appears as a state ballot measure because the state legislature voted to put it before the voters. The way it is now. Since 1996, when Proposition 209 passed, state and local entities are prohibited from using race and gender as means to minimize the underutilization of women and people of color. There are exceptions. State and local entities can consider sex when it is necessary as part of normal operations, such as staffing in a federal prison, which is a women's correctional facility, or when a requirement to receive federal funding is that a portion of the contracts be rewarded to businesses owned by women or people of color. Before Proposition 209, state and local entities had policies and programs intended to increase opportunities for people who faced inequalities due to race, sex, color, or ethnicity. For example, state universities considered diversity when making admission decisions, and state and local employment and recruitment policies were designed to increase the hiring of people of color and women. Since Proposition 209 was put in place, public entities have created or modified their policies and programs. An example would be state universities providing outreach and support programs for students who are first in their family to attend college, or that they consider the location of the high school that the student attended. What Proposition 16 would do, it would repeal Section 31 of Article 1 of the California State Constitution, which was put in place when Proposition 209 was passed in 1996. It would amend the California Constitution to allow preferential treatment to individuals or groups on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in the decision-making policies in public employment, education, and contracting. It does not alter state and federal laws guaranteeing equal protection and prohibiting unlawful discrimination. Fiscal impact of Proposition 16. There's no direct fiscal effect on state or local entities, and it's uncertain the fiscal effects in the future. It's unknown what future programs will do regarding the increase or decrease in costs. Arguments in favor of Proposition 16. All of us deserve equal opportunities to thrive and succeed. We need to expand access to good jobs and wages, regardless of gender, race, or ethnicity. Today, nearly all public contracts and jobs go to large companies run by older, white males. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy. Small Main Street businesses have lost over $1 billion because of the current law. And quotas are still prohibited. Arguments against Proposition 16. California has successful men and women of all races and ethnicities. Passing Proposition 16 would continue the stereotype that women and minorities can't make it on their own and need special preferences to succeed. The interpretation of underrepresented group can be misconstrued. Passing Proposition 16 would encourage state and local entities to reinstate costly bureaucracies and programs. Financial support of Proposition 16. For supporters, $10 million has been contributed from Opportunity for All Coalition, which is 50 plus current and former elected officials, 13 organizations, and UC regions. Opponents have contributed $250,000 from Californians for Equal Rights, which is Wade Connerly, 5 current and former officials, and 4 organizations. Proposition 16, yes or no? A yes vote would repeal Section 31, Article 1 of the California State Constitution and would allow state programs to consider diversity in the decision-making process for public employment, education, and contracting. A no vote would let the Section 31, Article 1 of the California State Constitution stand, which prevents the consideration of diversity in the decision-making process.
Okay, that's Proposition 16. And do we have any questions about 16? As of now, we do not. I'll give it 10 seconds. See if we got some fast typers. No questions about the diversity proposition. Okay, again, if something occurs to you, please don't hesitate to so this would only be for state agencies. That is state agency. Yes. Specifically, public employment, education, and contracting decisions. So that, but it also includes state universities and schools. Sexual orientation not included. Discrimination, sexual orientation. Well, that's a good question. You can consider sex and race. That is actually a good question. It does not specifically call out sexual orientation. I will look at that as we review the next one. I will ask a question about that because I suspect that that may be covered in the fine print of the amendment. Is that covered under gender? Well, that's what I don't know. So let me see if I can get a clarification on that. I've got a, I would hope that it does, but let me see if I can be more specific. Okay, so we're going to go to 22, which concerns app drivers. And let me tee that one up. No, I don't want you to talk yet. Okay, so let me launch this one. So this is Prop 22, and this exempts app-based transportation delivery companies from providing employee benefits to certain drivers. And I am going to share, and I'll start this presentation.
Pamela Schwartz. My colleagues and I represent the Leagues of Women Voters of San Mateo County. I will be presenting the pros and cons for State Ballot Measure 22, an initiative statute that changes employment classification rules for app-based transportation and delivery drivers. Proposition 22 would allow app-based drivers like people who drive for Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash to be treated as independent contractors. It does outline some additional benefits for drivers, but it exempts the app companies from having to provide benefits employees in California are entitled to. So let's start with the way it works now. Back in 2019, the California State Legislature passed Assembly Bill 5, which imposes strict requirements on who can be classified as an independent contract worker instead of an employee. This law impacts most employers in the state with a few specific exceptions, but it made the news because it would mean that app companies like Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash would have to classify their drivers as employees and provide them with benefits like minimum wage, paid sick leave, unemployment benefits, and workers' compensation. Since the passage of AB 5, app companies have continued to treat their drivers as independent contractors and are currently being sued by the state of California. So the app companies have put forward Proposition 22 to try and settle the matter in their favor. Before we go into what Prop 22 would do, I want to note that AB 5 affects all industries in California, but Proposition 22 would only apply to app-based transportation and delivery drivers. Essentially, if Prop 22 passes, it would mean that AB 5 does not apply to app-based drivers. The drivers would be considered independent contractors and given some benefits, but not everything the law currently requires. The chart here shows how Prop 22 proposes to treat app drivers and how it differs from AB 5. First, AB 5 requires drivers to be paid at least minimum wage, earn overtime, and have expenses reimbursed. Prop 22 would guarantee 120% minimum wage and some mileage reimbursement. It's important to know that the wage calculations here are slightly different because minimum wage under AB 5 includes the time drivers are logged into the app and waiting for passengers, but Prop 22's wage calculation would only apply to active driving time. Aside from pay, healthcare is a major concern for workers. AB 5 would require app companies to provide an employer healthcare option. Prop 22 would reimburse drivers who work 15 to 24 hours per week for 50% of a covered California Bronze health plan. And drivers who work 25 hours or more per week would get 100% of a Bronze tier health plan. If you haven't used the health insurance marketplace in California, think like the Olympics. Bronze plans are cheaper than silver and gold plans. AB 5 requires that employees are offered workers' compensation when they are injured on the job, paid family leave, paid sick days, and unemployment insurance. In contrast, Prop 22 would not provide any of that, but it would provide accident insurance for drivers and implement anti-discrimination policies and driver training in things like accident avoidance and recognizing and reporting sexual assault or misconduct. Finally, AB 5 allows for union rights with a state law change, but Prop 22 requires a 7/8 supermajority vote for drivers to unionize. So how will Prop 22 affect the state's finances? The predicted fiscal impact of Prop 22 is that there will be a slight increase in income taxes paid by rideshare drivers and investors who own stock in rideshare and delivery companies. The idea is that the app companies would be doing more business and seeing more profits because they did not have to provide the more expensive benefits required by AB 5. This slight increase in income taxes assumes that the courts in California would decide that app companies need to treat drivers as employees if Prop 22 does not pass. I also want to point out that Uber CEO and Lyft's president have said that the companies could suspend rideshare operations in California for a few months or a year if they have to comply with AB 5. They have suspended service in other areas that have attempted regulation. For example, Lyft and Uber shut down in Austin, Texas from May 2016 to May 2017 after the city passed an ordinance requiring driver background checks. The service resumed when the Texas governor signed a law that preempted Austin's ordinance. The companies have also indicated that if they had to comply with AB 5, they would not be able to have as many drivers as they do now. So that could also affect the finances. So should we allow app-based drivers to be independent contractors? Supporters say that Proposition 22 protects the choice of app-based drivers to work as independent contractors. It means they can work other jobs and set their own hours. Supporters claim that Prop 22 improves app-based work by requiring companies to provide some new benefits, like the healthcare subsidies and accident insurance. They also claim Prop 22 has expanded public safety protections by implementing policies on anti-discrimination and sexual harassment and requiring criminal background checks for drivers. Opponents say that Prop 22 creates a special exemption for app companies like Uber and Lyft that eliminates basic workplace benefits and replaces them with a new lower earnings guarantee and healthcare subsidy. Remember back to the earlier slide comparing benefits. AB 5 calculates minimum wage for the time spent in the app, while Prop 22 only includes active driving time. Opponents claim that over 70% of drivers work 30 or more hours per week already, and the existing law wouldn't impede flexibility. This assumes that the app companies would be willing to allow employees to set their own hours if they have to provide paid time off and overtime pay. In a Wall Street Journal article, Lyft claimed that 86% of their more than 300,000 drivers drive fewer than 20 hours per week. This discrepancy could be because opponents include all time spent in the app as working hours, while the companies are counting active driving time only. A lot of money has been pledged for Proposition 22. Supporters have given almost $200 million, while opponents have given less than $10 million. Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash each gave almost $50 million to fund the proposition, while Maple Bear Inc., which does business as Instacart, gave $28 million, and Postmates gave $10 million in support. Workers' unions have provided the largest donations to oppose Proposition 22. The top 4 donors are the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the United Healthcare Workers West, the Service Employee Union, and California Labor Federation. Given the amount of money that has been spent, I imagine we'll be seeing more ads about Prop 22 as we get closer to the election. To sum it up, a yes vote supports this ballot initiative to define app-based transportation or rideshare and delivery drivers as independent contractors and adopt labor and wage policies specific to app-based drivers and companies. A no vote opposes this ballot initiative, meaning AB 5 could be used to decide whether app-based drivers are employees or independent contractors. So a yes vote means you want app-based drivers to be considered independent contractors, and a no vote means you think AB 5 should be used to determine if drivers need to be treated as employees.
Okay, so this is one of those that you need to be really careful as to what a yes vote and what a no vote means. So I think it was explained very well by my fellow league member. A yes vote means that transportation and delivery drivers will be considered independent contractors. And a no vote means that AB 5 will be applicable to these app-based drivers. Okay, so let's go here. There was a question from the previous Proposition 16 about diversity and the question about sexual orientation, whether that's included under the under gender. And I did a quick search. I did not find anything that was explicit about that. All I can say is I did find a number of pride organizations advocating for this proposition. That's all I can say about it. So I think it would require, again, probably a look at the proposition itself to see whether or not sexual orientation is explicitly called out. Question, have any surveys been initiated which tries to capture what the drivers actually want? And that's a really good question. I asked that question myself, so I tried to do an internet search to see if there are independent surveys out there of these app-based drivers, and I could not find anything. So maybe that was about a week and a half ago that I did that. Now that it's closer to the election, and I see more ads coming out, maybe there are actually results out there. So I would urge you to do an internet search on that. If Prop 22 passes, how easily can it be changed? Also, can a different law be passed that would void this one? Well, Prop 22 is an initiative statute. It's not a constitutional amendment. I think that the answer to that question is that creating a proposition that overturns this, that goes back to kind of an AB 5 situation, could be, it could be a proposition which would be requires 500,000 signatures to get on the ballot. Yes, so it is possible to, but one thing to know is that I think that the courts treat this as precedent to some extent, that once the voters speak, that it's hard to overturn it. So, but it's not impossible. Prop 22, are there other professions that get this special treatment under AB 5? I don't know the answer to that. I can do, again, I could do, look here, let me just see if there's something that pops out in my, so contingent workers are considered employees as opposed to independent contractors. So AB 5 presumes a worker is an employee unless a hiring entity satisfies a 3-factor test. These factors are: the person is free from control and direction of the hiring entity in connection with the performance of the work, both under the contract for the performance of the work and in fact. 2, the person performs work that is outside the usual course of the hiring entity's business. And 3, the person is customarily engaged in an independently established trade, occupation, or business of the same nature as that involved in the work performed. And I know from my previous work in the electronics industry, this is what these 3 questions are basically what's required to designate someone as an independent contractor versus an employee. The Yes on Proposition 22 campaign claims the majority of rideshare drivers support flexibility in work. A recent online poll cited by the Yes on 22 campaign found more than 60% of app-based drivers supported Prop 22. The group maintains that most drivers want to remain contractors. This was 2 days ago. Thank you. Okay, but this is the Yes on Prop 2 campaign. Okay, so there's probably other information out there. Yes, there are. I'm not sure I understand that. Okay, so I think those questions are answered. We have not enough time to do Prop RR. We basically have 3 minutes left. So Nicole, I think we're basically done for today. Do you agree?
So sorry. Yes, I think we can probably, I don't know how long the recording is, but we do need to stop right at noon.
Yeah, it's more than 2 minutes. So
are there any final questions?
Okay, let's look. There's a thank you, and I thank you.
Time has really flown. I want to remind everybody that we will be moving into an AAUW meeting immediately after this meeting, and we're turning the cameras on for that one. So I think if you have a final question for Kathy, please pop it into the Q&A. We have 1 minute now. We'll give everyone time to leave the Zoom meeting and probably wait a minute or so for those who are staying for the AAUW.
And Nicole, can you So the question was whether the meeting was being recorded and where people can get the link to that recording.
So I put that in the chat, but the answer is yes, the meeting is being recorded. I will use the email that everyone registered with to send the link to the recording out. That will probably happen early next week, Monday or Tuesday, depends on when that link is ready. We also put it on our San Mateo County Libraries YouTube channel. So we have a voter resources playlist. Our previous pro-con ballot measure forum is there. We had an election panel that's there, and this recording will be there as well. And so as soon as that recording is ready, again, probably early next week, we'll add that to the playlist. And I'm about to pop into the chat the two more.
Oh, I had one clarification. Someone reminded me, I urged everyone to sign their ballots. It's actually not your ballot you sign. You actually sign the envelope that the ballot goes into. So just to be precise, when you're signing your ballot, you're actually signing the envelope that goes into it.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. It's so important. There's so much confusion about and concern. I think people are really taking a hard look and making sure that they're doing everything perfectly. I know I am. Checking and signatures change. That's a question that's come up a lot. We all want our ballots to be counted. So thank you for making that clarification. I heard a tip that you can, if you feel like your signature has changed, that it's to take a look at your driver license or your state ID, that is often the signature that your ballot is checked against.
Right. So one more thing.
Yep.
I'm seeing a lot of questions about videos on the other propositions. You can access those videos via either of the local league websites. So that would be South San Mateo County or North Central San Mateo County. So go to either one of our websites. Those videos are accessible, so you can watch them over again if you want. Okay, and Measure RR is also, there's a video for Measure RR.
I'm happy to link to those also in the email that I send out next week with this recording, if that's helpful for people. All right. You want to glance at the questions one last time, Kathy, or should we just say?
I think that
Thank
we
you.
have addressed all the immediate questions, and I was happy to do this for everyone. And happy voting, everybody.
Right.